Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Okay, so get this. The Helsinki Agreement, right? It's 1975, Cold War, everybody's on edge. 35 nations, including the US and the Soviet Union, decide to sign this thing. You'd think, okay, everyone's going to play by the rules now, right? Well, not so fast. We're diving deep into why this agreement wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. I've got my notes here and some stuff from Mr. Hutchings History. It's about to get interesting.
Yeah. The Helsinki Final Act, that's what it's formally called, was supposed to be this big moment of détente, like, let's chill out a bit, guys. But like you said, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
Right, like everyone just slapping a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem. So what were they really hoping to get out of this whole agreement?
Think about it. Diplomats from both sides of the Iron Curtain in one room trying to prevent another world war. That was the whole point of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the CSCE. And the Helsinki Final Act was like the final word separated into these three baskets. Each basket was supposed to handle a different part of how the East and West got along or didn't get along.
3 baskets. Sounds more like we're splitting up chores than like global politics. So what was in each of these baskets?
Basket 1 was all about security making borders permanent. Basically, it meant everybody had to accept the way Europe looked after World War II, which, by the way, was a huge win for the Soviets.
Because it basically gave them control of Eastern Europe, right?
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when you think about what Willy Brandt, the West German chancellor, was doing at the time. He had this policy, Ostpolitik, about opening up communication with East Germany. Basket 1 made that official, which eased tensions a bit, at least on the surface.
So it's like, we'll acknowledge this division to move forward.
Right.
Okay, so what about basket 2? More of the same or something totally different?
Basket 2 is all about cooperation, economics, science, culture, that kind of stuff. Supposed to bring everyone closer, right?
Working together, always a good thing, or so you'd think.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a hunch the Soviets might have had a hidden agenda.
You're catching on. The Soviets were really interested in Basket 2 because they saw it as a way to get their hands on some sweet, sweet Western technology. Remember, this was a time when their economy wasn't exactly thriving and they were desperate to modernize.
Ah, the old let's cooperate. And oh, by the way, we'll take that fancy tech off your hands strategy. Clever.
Yeah.
But we got to talk about Basket 3. And something tells me this is where the Helsinki Agreement takes a hard left turn.
Yeah, Basket 3 was a real curveball. You've got this agreement all about cooperation and playing nice, and then suddenly, bam, human rights and all that freedom stuff get thrown into the mix. Talk about a plot twist.
It's like they were playing chess, and someone just brought in a whole different board game. You're talking about things like freedom of speech, freedom of movement, things that were practically unheard of behind the Iron Curtain.
Mm-hmm.
Did the Soviets just go along with this? No pushback.
Well, they signed the agreement, but Basket 3 was the part that would really shake things up. They saw it as a way for the West to stick their noses where they didn't belong, especially in Eastern Europe.
Right, like, sure, talk about human rights all you want, but we're the ones who have to deal with the consequences.
Exactly. And this wasn't just them being paranoid. Brezhnev himself, the big guy in charge over there, he actually said something about it at the conference in Helsinki. He made it crystal clear that nobody, and he meant nobody, should be meddling in other countries' business. Talk about sending a message, huh?
So they signed the agreement, but with a big old asterisk next to their name. Don't even think about criticizing us. But did they really think they could control the narrative like that? Were there any rumblings within the Soviet leadership about this? Like, hey guys, maybe Basket 3 wasn't such a good idea.
That's a really good point. There are actually stories about some serious arguments within the Soviet leadership about signing the Helsinki Accords at all. Some of the Politburo members, those are the guys making the big decisions. They were worried the Basket 3 was basically giving the West an excuse to interfere.
Wow, so even within the Soviet Union, there were doubts, anxieties about this agreement. They knew they were taking a risk. So what happened? Did anything actually change because of Basket 3, or was it all just words on paper?
Here's the thing. The Soviets, they might have thought they could keep everything under control, but they completely underestimated the sheer power of ideas, especially when those ideas were about freedom and change, things people were literally craving. Basket 3, as much as they might have wanted to control it, became a tool for dissidents in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's like they accidentally handed their opponents the keys to the castle. So how did that happen? How did this Basket 3 actually help these dissident movements.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're living under this oppressive regime, right? No freedom, no say in anything. And then suddenly there's this internationally recognized agreement signed by your own government talking about things like free speech, the right to assemble basic freedoms. That's what Basket 3 was for a lot of people in Eastern Europe. A glimmer of hope, a way to challenge the way things were.
It gave their desire for freedom legitimacy. Like, hey, our own government agreed to this. Were there any people or groups that really embodied this?
Oh, absolutely. Václav Havel, for example, who was a writer in Czechoslovakia, later became a symbol of the Velvet Revolution, used the Helsinki Accords to challenge the communist regime. Then you have Lech Walesa in Poland, started as a shipyard worker, ended up leading the Solidarity movement. These guys and countless others use those Helsinki principles to take on the entire Soviet system.
It's amazing how an agreement that was supposed to maintain order had the complete opposite effect,
Right.
like a domino effect that nobody saw coming. You mentioned solidarity. How did they specifically use the Helsinki Agreement?
The Solidarity movement was huge. In 1980, this massive trade union in Poland, they decided to go on strike. They wanted their union to be recognized, and they demanded all these reforms, and they actually cited the Helsinki Agreement in their demands.
Wow, calling out the Soviets on their own hypocrisy, that's bold. How did the Soviets react?
Total dilemma, right? If they shut down Solidarity, they'd be violating the Helsinki Accords for the whole world to see, which could have been disastrous for them.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place? Sounds like Basket 3 really backfired on them.
Yeah.
But what did historians make of all this? Was the Helsinki Agreement a mistake, a stroke of genius, or something else entirely?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
So we've got this agreement, right? Supposed to make everything stable, but instead it ends up shaking up the entire Soviet system. I bet the history books have a field day with this one.
Yeah.
So how do they explain how the Helsinki Accords actually played out?
It's a debate, that's for sure. Let's start with the Orthodox historians. They're not buying what the Soviets were selling, not one bit. They see the Helsinki Accords as, like, a PR stunt, a way for the Soviet Union to look good on the world stage without actually changing anything at home.
All about appearances, huh? Classic power play. But I'm sure there are other takes on this.
Oh yeah, for sure. Revisionist historians, they come at it from a totally different angle. They think the Helsinki Accords were actually part of a bigger plan by the U.S. to weaken the Soviet Union from the inside out.
Interesting. So Basket 3, with all the human rights talk, was actually a strategy to stir the pot and get people in the Soviet bloc to demand change.
Exactly. Plant the seeds of discontent and watch things unfold. It's amazing how one document can be interpreted in so many ways, but it seems like there's some middle ground here too.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
That's where the post-revisionists come in. They're all about the law of unintended consequences. They argue that the Soviets just didn't see this coming with Basket 3. They never expected those ideas about freedom to resonate so strongly with people who felt trapped.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the power of hope, especially in a situation like that.
Yeah.
Did any historians go as far as to connect the Helsinki Accords to the fall of the Soviet Union?
Absolutely. After the Cold War ended, a lot of historians saw the Helsinki Accords as a turning point. They argued that it was like slowly chipping away at the foundation of Soviet power. It gave a voice to the dissidents and exposed the weaknesses of the Soviet system for what they were.
It's mind-blowing. What started as a simple agreement, at least on the surface, ended up having the complete opposite effect. Makes you wonder, if the Soviets knew then what we know now, would they have ever signed those accords?
The million-dollar question, right? It just goes to show you, even with the best intentions, you can never fully predict the consequences of your actions, especially when it comes to global politics.
It really does make you think, doesn't it, about the agreements we're making today, the things we take for granted. What kind of impact will they have years, decades down the line? Who knows? It's a little unsettling when you think about it. Anyway, that's the Helsinki Accords, a diplomatic tightrope walk, a study in contradictions. It just goes to show you history is full of surprises. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.